For our next session, we're staying with the theme of Europe, and we're going to be looking at sourcing LNG for what market in the world. Of course, Europe plays a particular role in the LNG market as a kind of a sink, a market of last resort. And we've seen that happening over the last year or two, of course. And at times, Europe coming up against a bit of a buffer in terms of its storages becoming full. Anyway, the moderator for this next session will be Stuart Broadley, who's CEO of the Energy Industries Council. I'm going to hand over to him now to introduce his panelists. A quick reminder before I do that you can ask questions using the chat box on the right, and I would urge you to do that. And just a little bit of news from the US. It seems that Biden has now taken Arizona, but it's still very too close to call, and it will probably be a couple of days at least, perhaps a couple of weeks before we hear anything. Anyway, back to today's event, and over to you, Stuart. Take it away.
Yeah, thank you very much, Alex. But perhaps if I could say in the Q&A, no questions on the US elections, because we don't have time, although that's an interesting topic. So welcome, everybody. I'm Stuart Broadley, CEO of the EIC, Energy Industries Council. We're the UK's largest energy trade association, working with supply chain companies across the energy space, oil and gas, certainly LNG, but also renewables and nuclear, conventional power, and energy transition, including hydrogen, helping them to diversify, grow, and export. And delighted to be moderating this next session here as part of the LNG to Power sessions, and with a session today called Sourcing LNG for Europe. We have two great speakers, which I shall mention now, and then in a second we'll turn to them, but then I'll just give you 1 minute of my thoughts. So we have Des Wong from S&P Global Platts, who's managing editor of European and Atlantic Basin LNG. And we have Elena Magrina, Department of Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, also known as BEIS, for the British government, head of European gas. So LNG for Europe, I mean, a fascinating subject, of course, with such a changing world, a fast changing and uncertain world. And I'm not even going to talk about Brexit, so don't worry, I don't even mean that kind of change. What I really mean is that we're in a world where, I noticed Des thinking, well, I might mention Brexit. So I'll leave that one to you, Des, if you want to mention Brexit, but I'm not. But in a world where, you know, we have sustained low demand for key commodities, including gas right now, and raising real questions, I think, about what has always been seen as this transition fuel. So from a decarbonisation point of view, from an affordability point of view, from a supply, and you can kind of rely on it for 20, 30 years while other uncertainties happen. I think now there are real questions about, you know, even LNG over the medium term, perhaps not the short term. You know, I think what an amazing time it is if you are in the game of investing to look at where to go. You know, there's probably so many opportunities right now to invest for the long term. I think there's real valuation opportunities in certain markets and products and technologies right now, but others that are full of risk. So a fascinating time. We have COP26 coming up just a year from now, which will raise many questions around the technologies and the sources of fuel to be used, and may raise questions around LNG and its role. And I think always people are taking the view as a transition fuel from a decarbonisation point of view. LNG is a good place to go. And I suspect COP that, you know, will ask those questions a bit more seriously. So with all of that, I'm delighted, therefore, to go to our first speaker, which is Desmond Wong. And he will, I think, take us through the first stage of thinking about what's this all going to mean. And then after that, I'll introduce Elena. So Des, over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Stuart. I'm just going to put up a short presentation or cool slides I prepared to kind of set the stage. Can anyone see that? Right. So yeah. What I'm going to do is I'm going to set the stage for where we are right now, and that'll sort of lead to some of the questions that we need to kind of think about for LNG in Europe and elsewhere in the Atlantic, right? So it's been a very interesting 2 years or so with the ramp up of the US projects and more supply in the Pacific. And one of the biggest drivers has been, of course, projects like Gorgon and the other new CBM projects in Australia, providing a lot of supply into the Pacific. And as a result, it's kind of driven down prices together with weak winters in Asia. At the same time, you've got the US projects ramping up. But of course, all of this additional supply has resulted in relatively, in fact, record low LNG prices on a spot basis globally. And that has resulted in some quite interesting side effects, because Europe is, after all, only 10, 11, depending on how you do it, 12 days sailing away from the US. And when the Asia Pacific is not buying, the volumes end up in Europe. And this is kind of a view on where they've been going. And you can see the Spain's increase, as well as the UK and France. And that blue line is 2020 up until mid-October. So you can see that we're pretty much on course for exceeding even last year's significant gains in LNG deliveries. And that's largely because the netbacks to Europe have been primarily favorable for US volumes. And as you saw earlier, with the very low prices in summer, you want to deliver into a location in which you can get the best netback. And those volumes have made their way into various locations, including, in fact, if you look at all of the other countries, Italy, the Netherlands, everyone's seen essentially record increases. And where are they coming from? I think for those of us in the UK, it's no surprise that Qatari volumes have made huge landfall in the terminals here. But the other two locations, and this is where the marginal stuff comes from, right? The spot cargoes. You're looking at Russian deliveries, largely from, in fact, only from Yamal in this case, and the United States, which shouldn't surprise anyone either, since the start of the Yamal project and Europe's proximity to it. At the same time, of course, all of those US cargoes needed to find a home. Well, at least the marginal US cargoes needed to find a home when the Asia Pacific prices were extremely low over the summer, and they've made their way to Europe in droves. It also is interesting to note that a lot of the spot cargoes being offered to Europe during the past year or so, and the year before, have largely come from the US, and that's because of their flexibility. A delivery from the US going to either the Mediterranean for the south of France or Spain pretty much has the same logistics cost as it would take to go to Northwest Europe, namely Belgium, the Netherlands, the UK, Northern France, that sort of thing. And given how prices in the Pacific have been extremely weak over the summer, we've seen for the first time this year, we've talked about it for several years now, where when the US cargoes will eventually shut in. And that began happening this year when the prices for delivered spot cargoes into Asia, typified by the JKM, and in Europe, the Northwest European market, the Mediterranean market, you're looking at the first year of cancellations. Of course, as winter gets closer and prices in the Pacific begin to recover and the prices in Europe begin to recover, the cancellations got a lot lower. And then this is a view of loading prices. Now, by December, or rather for cargoes nominated for December loading, we understand there's no cancellation. So winter has kind of stopped that. But this is the first year we've seen people draw back cargoes from the US. Now, outside of that, the other thing that's been happening is that because all of this volume needed to find a home in Europe, conventional wisdom has always been that TTF is the price of LNG in Europe, right? Because that's what the hubs will pay for gas. But that's never really been the case. Back in the day, European LNG purchases needed to be made against competing markets. Brazil, for example, during the World Cup or the Olympics, or versus JKM. I remember a particular winter in 2013 or UK storage ran down to near zero. As a result, some of the LNG cargoes purchased had to beat Asia Pacific demand during that particular winter. So, and that kind of delta to TTF has only become more volatile and pronounced with all of the cargoes arriving into Europe. And you can see that we're looking at a delta to TTF, whether in Northwest Europe or the Mediterranean, that can go as wide as 40, 50 cents in either direction. And finally, one other thing about LNG in Europe, and I think this kind of feeds into some of the discussions we have about transition fuels and decarbonization. Europe now, and we've been talking about this, of course, for many years as well. The industry has been looking at LNG as a bunker fuel, and I think over the past year and a half, we've really seen LNG as a bunker fuel sort of come into its own. And you're seeing Europe essentially forming the most advanced LNG as a bunker fuel market. So you're seeing greater standardization of contracts, more structure coming into the sales purchase sort of approach to it, more standardized logistics, greater conversions, and people actually putting the money and the time to switch to LNG as a bunker fuel. So as far as the discussion for discussion around decarbonization and where does LNG stand in the energy transition, we shouldn't forget the aspect of LNG as a bunker fuel, which is now, of course, by today, we've seen sort of cross-basin deals as well. So contracts for loadings in both Europe and Singapore. And the US is not far behind either. And that's kind of the state of play of the LNG market as far as Europe goes, and that's where we are. And more than happy to hear what sort of questions everyone will have around this this topic.
Yes, thank you so much. Fascinating. I really like your point at the end there as well, which leads nicely into some of the other things we'll be talking about the bunker fuel, which is, of course, a very important point. So we'll have a chance to come back and ask some questions of Des in 5 or 10 minutes when we get into the Q&A. Just a reminder to everybody listening in, please do put in your questions in the chat box. We really do like to get involvement of everybody listening in. Please do. Meanwhile, let's go to our next speaker, which is Elena Magrina. She is head of European gas for the British government's Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. Elena, over to you.
Thanks, Stuart. Hello, everyone. It's good to be here today. So thanks for the invite. As Stuart said, I work in the natural gas team in BEIS, which at the moment has slightly expanded to work on specifically on gas decarbonization and also to continue to work on security of supply. And as Stuart said, I lead on EU issues. And so what I thought I'd do today is talk about the importance of LNG to the UK, the move towards gas decarbonization, and future plans based on what we know the UK and the EU are doing. So I'll start by saying that the UK government recognises that LNG has an important role to maintain gas security of supply at a global level, and that it's also evident that natural gas can help countries move away from more carbon-intensive fossil fuels. The UK has a liquid gas market that is well linked to the global LNG market, and it includes 3 LNG terminals, which represent around 20% of total European import capacity. And so what this means is that, you know, these 3 LNG terminals mean that the UK has the potential to act as an LNG hub for Europe, because the UK is well connected to European neighbours through direct pipelines, in particular to the Netherlands, Belgium and Ireland. And what's happening now is that the UK government is undertaking a review of domestic gas quality. And the ambition is that these changes will allow a wider specification of gas quality to be introduced into the UK gas market, making the UK a more attractive LNG destination, and also allowing more low carbon gases onto the grid in the future, which is my next point, the importance of gas decarbonisation. In the UK, natural gas has helped us move away from coal. It has provided flexible power generation to complement intermittent renewables. But the UK government is now exploring ways to eliminate the carbon emissions associated with natural gas in the context of achieving our commitment to net zero emissions by 2050. And there are several options to do this, including the use or the deployment of carbon capture, usage and storage, CCUS, and also hydrogen. These are technologies that will help us decarbonize in a way that maintains security of energy supply, but also affordability for consumers, which is very important. There are a couple of important pieces of, well, strategies coming out. There's the energy white paper that is due to be published in the autumn. And separately, the UK is committed to developing and publishing a hydrogen strategy in early 2021, which will bring together the UK hydrogen story, showcasing the activity to date, and setting out an action plan for decarbonisation and expansion in the 2020s. So this is all coming up. What's currently happening, the work that is ongoing at the moment is about exploring the potential blending of new gases onto the system, such as biomethane or hydrogen, and looking at what that looks like at greater scale, essentially. And to give you a sense of the work that's happening in this space in practice, I'll give you a couple of hydrogen project examples. There's one of them is High Deploy, which is a live trial that has been going on since August 2019. And this one is exploring the safety case and the viability of blending up to 20% volume of hydrogen with natural gas at Keele University. And what this trial is doing is it's trying to provide evidence on how consumers do not have to change their cooking or their heating appliances when using blending hydrogen, which results in minimal disruption and also less costs. If the health, safety and executive approve it, then the second and the third phases would go ahead in the early 2020s. And if it does develop the safety case, this could help us with future nationwide hydrogen deployment. Another good example is HyNet Northwest, which is exploring hydrogen and CCUS, carbon capture, usage and storage. And the focus of this is to explore options to reduce carbon emissions from industry, from domestic heat and transport at low cost. It involves providing up to 100% hydrogen to 10 energy intensive industry sites, using the development of a new hydrogen pipeline within Northwest England. And essentially what will happen is that the surrounding homes and businesses would receive a blend of up to 20% hydrogen in the local distribution network to support efforts to decarbonize heat. So these are just a couple of examples of the work that's happening in the UK. In the EU, we know that they're also exploring ways to decarbonize gas. So they're in a similar space to us, ahead of a package of EU legislation that we expect in Q4 next year. And based on the Commission's European hydrogen strategy that was published in July earlier this year, we think that their main focus is likely to be on renewable hydrogen, which uses electrolyzers powered by renewable energy. But it also recognizes the role of other low carbon hydrogen production processes in a transition phase, for example, through the use of CCUS or other forms of low carbon electricity to clean existing hydrogen production, reduce emissions and scale up the market. So if you have a look at the strategy, you'll see that there's a roadmap to 2050 in 3 phases. And the investment is also likely to be significant. So up to 2050, investments in production capacities could amount to anywhere between 180 to 470 billion euros in Europe. So I guess, the main message is it's early days. Gas decarbonisation is a fairly new area with some important challenges, some unanswered questions. But hopefully this gives you a sense of the work that's happening in this space of gas decarbonisation. And as Stuart said, please do ask questions because we're very keen to hear from you as well.
Super, Elena, thank you so much. I think, wow, we've got 2 excellent speakers and with very different perspectives or very different topics that they've raised. Okay, just a reminder, please do send in your questions, but we have lots here to discuss, so I'm going to get started. And Dan, I'm going to start with you with the kind of LNG margins and prices, with the pricing issues that are coming into Europe. Well, how's Europe going to deal with this? What's the impact on Europe of these kind of margin pressures?
Well, the interesting thing is that because the marginal molecule arrives in Europe now, the marginal molecule also affects the European gas price. So when JKM rises as a result of either, and most recently seen with all of the US disruptions and the outages seen in Australian projects in the Pacific, JKM has actually rose quite significantly. It's come back down. But for a while, it was breaching $7 for deliveries into Northeast Asia. What that meant at the same time was that because the marginal molecule was no longer there, namely the U.S. projects being out of action thanks to hurricanes and a variety of other reasons, you ended up with the lack of LNG and lack of availability of LNG pushing up or providing support for the TTF. And I think we all saw the gains in TTF over the past couple of weeks, driven by some of this. Now, of course, at the same time, the fortunes of the LNG world are to an extent also the fortunes of TTF or MBP, because now that the projects in the US are coming back online, TTF is losing a little bit of steam on the anticipation that US volumes are available. And the arbitrage to Asia is now closed. So, wherever the LNG market goes, it affects the marginal molecule, and the marginal molecule in Europe, believe it or not, is LNG.
So I just want to make sure I understand what that means. So from a European point of view, if we were to summarize that, opportunity or threat?
I would say it would be an opportunity, because what that means is that you've got a gap between the price of delivered LNG into Europe, and you've got the price of gas in Europe, right? So what is covered in terms of forward curves already existing for market participants and utilities and whoever is involved in the gas markets of Europe? You have JKM, which will allow you to hedge, the JKM derivative, which will allow you to hedge on a cash settled basis going out to 3 years and beyond. So you've kind of got your pricing covered there. In Europe, be it TTF or MBP, you've got forward curves going as far as the horizon, right? The only problem is we don't have a forward curve or a derivative to manage the risk around that delivered LNG into Europe. Now, as I showed earlier, there is a big delta that's happening between delivered LNG prices into Europe. When demand is low in Asia and people need to drop volumes, the price can be as far as 30 to 40 cents below TTF. And when, of course, Europe is competing with the Asia Pacific, you're looking at premiums that could go for 20 to 30 cents. That's a lot of money. Or rather, that's a lot of exposure that people are facing. So I think it's an opportunity for market development, because what you have now is a requirement to develop a mechanism, a hedging mechanism that will allow you to participate in the international LNG market while also protecting you against the exposure from demand elsewhere in the world, because the hubs are just not.
Yeah, so I'm going to that. Thank you for that. And so opportunity, Elena. So LNG from a UK point of view, does this also provide an opportunity for the UK? And I guess linked to that, obviously LNG is central to the security, the energy security approach within the UK. So again, what's your view? What's the government's view on LNG and its role within the UK going forward from an energy security point of view? And given where we are in terms of supply and demand, I guess, are we in a good position for that?
Yes. So, okay, can you hear me, Stuart?
Yes. Yep.
Thanks. Yes. So definitely. I mean, in terms of security of supply, LNG is very important. As I said, the UK does have a liquid gas market. We're well linked to the global LNG market, but we have a liquid gas market. I mean, the main thing I think at the moment, and something that I didn't mention, but it's very important, is, and you did mention at the start, is COP, which is happening later this year in November in Glasgow, next year, sorry, 2021. And the UK is committed to delivering an ambitious COP, but also to publishing an ambitious UK nationally determined contribution, NDC, well ahead of the summit. And as part of that, gas decarbonisation, which I mentioned, and the role of LNG will all be, part of part of the energy transition, which is one of the COP26 campaigns, focusing on the global shift from coal power to clean energy. And there was the recognition of the bridging role that gas continues to play in the UK, both for power, but also for heat, and essentially the need for us to decarbonize gas use going forward in the UK. And this is not just relevant to the UK, this is also particularly important for some countries where natural gas is helping them deliver their Paris Agreement contributions in a cost-effective way. And I'll take the opportunity to mention as well that the UK is working hard to secure a further round of pledges to Mission Innovation, which is a global intergovernmental initiative. And we're working to accelerate, we're focusing on achieving the Paris goals, but it includes more demonstration of key decarbonization technologies that I mentioned earlier, such as hydrogen and CCUS. So this is where we are. Key role on, the key role of LNG for security of supply, but this needs to be seen in the context as well of gas decarbonization.
Yeah, and this is the fast changing world. One of the aspects of the fast changing world I was talking about. So LNG is already kind of seen as it was always a transition fuel, but now the timescale of what that might be is shortening. Perhaps it's hard to know. But so I'm going to come back to that. But thank you. We are getting some questions in. Des, question I'm going to shoot to you, which is from Ryan Pereira, where he says, "Good discussion so far." He wants to know, can you comment on the expanding LNG import capacity in Europe, and in particular this capacity being snapped up by the LNG exporters, with a few examples recently? A brief answer, please.
Yeah, so to kind of shrink it all down, yes, I think suppliers have been quite clearly securing terminal capacity in Europe, and people have also expressed quite a bit of interest in upcoming terminal capacity, right? The Croatian terminal saw a lot of interest when it had its open season. At the same time, you're looking at people taking a peek at the German terminals, right? Because there's two aspects to this. Sellers, or rather producers, want to be able to secure their downstream supply, because as you know, one of the issues with LNG is that you can't really store it, right? Every molecule, every drop has to be delivered. So they want to ensure that they've got supply that they can put cargoes into, but at the same time also secure a location at which they can place those volumes versus any potential optimizations that they have. Because fundamentally, Europe is a sink and not a massive demand market. So if Asia goes up, they need to know that they can balance that Asian position against that European position. So I would say, for the producers, they've taken the steps to secure that aspect of it, secure that that destination. And I think it's quite also interesting to see that there's a lot of discussion in the LNG industry at this point in time for finding a way to optimize capacity across Europe, because the terminals really don't talk to each other. It's not like Spain and Enagas, right? So
because they compete.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So a way to optimize all of that would also kind of allow LNG to balance itself throughout Europe, rather than just aim for particular locations that are logistically or financially more advantageous, because you can't tell where that is until you...
So this is a call for a collaborative approach to LNG. Okay, that's a really good idea. And maps up. I mean, we don't have a huge amount of time in our panel to discuss that, but that would be something for the organizers to pick up, I think, as a discussion point in future panel discussions through the day. Great point. Elena, there's a question come in for you from Jacob Klimstra. 20% of hydrogen and natural gas might not be a problem for domestic users, but it is for industrial users. 20% hydrogen is only 6% reduction in CO2 emissions. What's the benefit of blending?
That's a good question. Thanks, Stuart. So what I can say is that the existing gas networks, systems and markets that we have today are essentially going to provide the knowledge and the building blocks in the UK's transition to net zero, through the introduction of low carbon gases and eventually a potential role for hydrogen. And I guess the point is that we don't yet have certainty on the future role and the extent of the distribution or the transmission networks. And so what we're doing is essentially the UK is taking steps in the near term to enable decarbonized gas pathway without locking us into such a long-term energy vector. So for repurposing the gas grid to hydrogen to be an option for decarbonizing heat, a lot more work is needed to prove the safety case and the feasibility case, and understand the costs and the benefits. What BEIS is doing is working with industry stakeholders very closely to ensure that all the R&D, the testing, the trialing work has been identified. So it is early days, so I won't go into specific percentages for blending, but one of the advantages is the ability to use the existing gas networks.
I think it's true, Elena, isn't it, that one of the major issues that's got to be overcome with hydrogen is the kind of consumer sentiment around safety. And that's why this first step towards proving the blending, and then there are other projects I know going on around safe use of hydrogen within homes, leak management, all these kind of questions that have to go through the health and safety executive and be fully proven before the scale up can really happen. So I know these are the steps that you're going through. Exciting project. I mean, you know, massive utility scale project with great opportunities for any suppliers listening in at some point as well. So thank you. I'm going to come back, but there's a question for you, which I think it plays joining the two things together now. So is there demand yet that you're seeing for hydrogen that's already starting to have a disruptive impact on the LNG market in Europe?
I would say actually that hydrogen has that, and I think Elena's already commented on that a little bit, in that there are a lot of lessons to be learned from the LNG industry that the hydrogen industry can sort of leapfrog from, right? There's that talk about, you know, shared infrastructure and that sort of thing going on. But fundamentally, if natural gas is to be replaced by hydrogen, and the transportation methods, things like, well, you have to freeze it and you put it onto a boat, that the expertise from there naturally flows from the LNG sector as well. So rather than in a competing sense, I think it's more of an evolution where one industry can certainly move on to support decarbonization and transfer that expertise, the logistics problems, everything that LNG had to sort out. Hydrogen has to sort out, especially with the waterborne aspect of it. And that will sort of blend the LNG sector into the hydrogen one eventually. It's very similar to how, you know, a lot of oil expertise ended up in LNG, because after a while people realized it wasn't gas, it was a cargo market.
Okay. So you mentioned the word blending there. You didn't mean blending. You meant kind of markets blending, or did you literally mean infrastructure blending?
Oh, infrastructure and market blending, because once again,
okay.
in that sense, you've got a combination of skill sets that really apply to the next phase of decarbonization.
Okay, thank you. Elena, then, so let's talk a bit more about your role. Fascinating role you have. Little envious of some of the stuff you must be working on right now. And so a couple of points I'm going to put together into one. So you're obviously working on gas decarbonisation with the EU, even though there's an EU exit process going on. So, but can you share a bit about kind of the gas decarbonisation? What's the process of doing this? And linked to that, what's the time scale? What do you think is realistic time scale? Obviously, UK has a 2050 net zero carbon target legislation, but realistically, we need steps towards that. And so gas decarbonisation, so this isn't a hydrogen question now, but an existing gas decarbonisation. What's the time scale? And particularly with the EU, what's the plan?
Thanks, Stuart. I think a lot of the more detailed or the timescales might become clear when the UK's hydrogen strategy comes out early next year, and some of it as well in the energy white paper that's due to be published in the autumn. So do watch out for those. I would say, I mean, just to give you a sense of the work that's taking place in BEIS at the moment. I mentioned I'm in the natural gas team, but there are a range of teams working on all this. We've got specific teams for hydrogen economy, and hydrogen for heat decarbonization. We've got teams working specifically on carbon capture, usage and storage. There are quite a few teams that we're trying to bring together to work on this challenge. And the main thing is, I think both for the UK and for Europe is, is there anything that can be done in the 2020s more immediately? That's the main question at the moment. And obviously all the way to 2050. I think what we do know is that natural gas has an important role, as I mentioned, but also an ongoing role to play in the future as we decarbonize our energy system. And I guess how we use natural gas will need to change to eliminate the CO2 associated with burning it. And what we're likely to see in the coming years is the gas market having to evolve to ensure that the right market and regulatory signals are provided to ensure the right level of investment and maintenance throughout the transition to net zero by 2050. But I would stress, watch out for these two documents that will provide a bit more detail than I'm able to provide now.
Okay, that's good. I understand. I know we've got some policy documents to come, which we're all looking forward to. So there's that. So Elena there was obviously sharing about this changes to come, and that hydrogen's getting a lot of focus. I'm wondering whether you're seeing already LNG FIDs, final investment decisions, around the world, but particularly, of course, in the Europe Atlantic region, already being impacted by these kind of this hyper topic of energy transition and hydrogen, and the questions it's clearly raising in the minds of investors and governments around how long will LNG, be what we've been talking about it for years to be as the transition fuel, a key fuel that that has a healthy 20-30 year future. All these questions are must be impacting investment decisions or not. So what's your view, please?
Well, I think the signal has been quite clearly broadcast this week, right? When we saw those agreements, those initial agreements between NextDecade in the US and ENGIE kind of fall apart a little bit this week, and ENGIE will not be going through with its purchase of LNG from that project, thanks to their commitment towards decarbonization going ahead. And that's a major French utility with significant amount of gas demand in Europe that has said, look, it doesn't really fit with my plans. And that says something. What it ultimately says in the rest of Europe, I don't know how the other utilities react, but that is sort of the first I suppose, shot across the bow for the natural gas markets and LNG, because you're looking at competing against something which has a very specific time frame, as we've all discussed. You're looking at hydrogen nipping at the heels of LNG. Now, there's some markets that will continue to use LNG. In terms of decarbonization, it is the front runner for ship fuels, as I mentioned earlier. So that it still has a major role to play in that space. But in terms of new investments, I think at least one major European utility has spoken, and we'll see how the rest do down the line.
Linked to that, and we've only unfortunately, sadly, got 3 minutes left, and I do feel like there's so much to talk about here, but I'll try and finish on time. So I've got a linking question to that, and then Elena, I'll come to you last with a COP ambition question. So there's a question actually coming from Mohammed. I think it's Mohammed Magalis, but we've got a partial question on the panel in the main platform, and then it sort of comes through in Zoom as well. I think the question is GATA. Basically, what's the impact on the GATA? They're heavily invested, of course. I heard in the previous panel 100 ships on order. I don't know whether that's right or not for GATA LNG and so on. But what's your view on what's this mean to GATA? Have they overplayed their hand here?
I would say not necessarily, right? Because the markets and the buyers are careful and interested in decarbonization, as we spoke about earlier. But here's an interesting new trend that you're seeing in LNG. You're seeing it develop in the US. You're seeing it develop in the Middle East with Qatari production. It's the rise of what people like to call green LNG, right? Where you have either the production process has been optimized to the point where there's carbon capture, or there's as little leakage as possible, or through the development of offsets for that particular project. And we've already seen about 6 to 7 deals for quote unquote green LNG in the future, all using different approaches, either offsets or cleaning up the production process to limit carbon leakage or to improve carbon capture around that particular process. And the Qataris are at the forefront of the production side improvements to their processes. So it's not like the producers are unaware that decarbonization is on the way. The producers are taking the steps to make the change and to improve exposure to I suppose you could call it the risk of carbon in this respect. And yeah, I don't think the industry has been caught napping, especially our folks in Qatar.
Okay, thank you, Des. I'm sure you're right, but it's interesting that people are already asking the question. And I think then the big question is then, Elena, I'll come to you to close out for us. And by the way, thank you both of you so much. I think it's a fascinating discussion, great speakers, highly knowledgeable. So Elena, COP26, a year away, everybody's very excited about it, but I think more importantly, it's a very critical timing for the planet, but also for technology, for decarbonisation, and actually, of course, for the UK government and what it plans to say. Now, I'm not asking you to predict what the outcome will be of the hydrogen policy or of what the Prime Minister is going to say, but I think from your department's point of view, can you give an indication of where you think the direction of travel will be with COP26 and 100 heads of state all coming together, hopefully in person? It might be the first face-to-face event for 2 years. How exciting would that be? And what's going to be said, or can you give us sort of scoping of the direction of travel from COP26?
Yes, thanks, Stuart. Yes, well, I'll start by saying that the UK is committed to delivering an ambitious COP26. As you said, it's taking place next year, November in Glasgow, and as I said earlier, we're also committed to publishing an ambitious UK NDC well ahead of the summit. And this is very important now while we recover from COVID-19. It is critical that we build back greener and also more resilient. So, we are looking forward to COP26. What I can say about what might be coming up is there will be several campaigns. One of them will be on the energy transition. And this campaign will focus on accelerating the global shift from coal power to clean energy. But it will include the bridging role of gas. The bridging role that it will continue to play in the UK and also for other countries.
So gas will be an included part of this transition process. That's good to know. Sorry, continue.
Yeah. No, that's it essentially. Yes, because the UK is aware that it's played a role in the UK, but also for many other countries as a transition fuel. So it is important, and it will continue to be important.
And a big move then to kind of emission collection, storage, utilization, of course, of the CCS will, I'm sure, be a big part of it as well then.
Exactly.
Super. Well, listen, we're out of time. We're slightly late, actually. So thank you so much, Des and Elena, for really excellent work. I hope everybody's enjoyed the discussion. Thank you for those that took the time to ask a question. We enjoyed that. And so now I hand back to the organisers and enjoy the rest of the day, everybody. Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Thanks so much. Bye-bye.